Hello, and welcome to Science of the Times podcast. I'm Syma Khalid.
And I'm Tim Colson, and we're finally doing it.
Yep.
Isn't it exciting?
It is.
Honestly, we've been talking about doing this podcast for ages, but turned out not to each other. But then we knew one another. We might come on to how we met later, but we are so excited to be doing this. And our motivation is we both really enjoy science, and we like teaching science, and we like explaining it to anyone who's interested, don't we? And
absolutely. And our idea is for the audience is that it's for everyone. So whether you're a science junkie or you haven't done science since your school days, since your GCSEs, or, just perhaps a bit beyond that, the idea is to keep it non-technical, but engaging and keeping as many of the details as we possibly can.
And what we're going to do is at the start of each episode, we're going to discuss a topic between us, and we're going to ask some of the questions, and we're going to choose newsworthy topics, so things that have been in the news or that come up into the news fairly frequently. And we're going to interview some of the world's leading scientists about it to kind of dig in and find out a little bit more. And if you're listening and if there's a topic that you'd like us to cover, you should drop us a line on the email, which you can find in the link below.
Sure, so and we'll give out the email at the end maybe too. So
can you remember it?
I will by the end of the podcast, Tim. Come on.
So that's an excellent start. So some of the things that we're thinking about doing is we're going to do something on DNA, I think, originally, aren't we? So one of the first ones.
Yeah, absolutely. So DNA encodes all of the material that makes us who we are. And it turns out that here in the UK, we have some of the people that developed the latest technologies that make it all possible to sequence DNA at with very tiny devices. And we're going to have some of these people telling us all about their work, and importantly, actually, what might be within the scope of the work in the future.
And then another topic where we're lining up people to talk about is this amazing spacecraft that flew all the way to a meteor, landed on the meteor, picked up some material, came back to Earth, and they've just been analysing that material. And it's remarkable what they've found. So we're going to talk to someone who's been heavily involved in that project, and we're going to talk to someone else about what this means for the emergence of life, something that happened 4 billion years ago. And then football?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to have football. So Tim and I are both big football fans. He's a Spurs fan. We won't hold that against him.
And you support?
I support Liverpool, so all is good.
Yeah.
And we're going to have someone on the show who's developed a series of tests from which it seems that one can tell if someone is going to go on and become an elite footballer.
And we're actually going to trial those tests ourselves and in the park. So
perhaps foolishly.
So and we'll have you can take bets on who's going to win, and it won't be me. And then another one. So I'm kind of a mad dog owner. I own a dog called Woofler. He comes to work with me. And another thing that lots of people like pets. So we're going to do one on dog domestication, how dogs got domesticated and other pets as well, and why we build these relationships with them, and actually how those relationships can be quite good and quite positive for us. So it's going to be broad ranging. We're going to have quite a lot of topics, but that's just a taster of the first few that we're going to do.
Yeah, and as Tim said, if there's things that people want to hear about and want us to talk about, then please do email in. We have an open and broad remit.
We do. Now you might be wondering where we're sat, and this isn't either of our homes or our offices, but we're both based at Oxford University, and we're in the beautiful Fellows Library in Jesus College, Oxford, and we're both researchers here. We're both professors, and we both study different topics. So, Simon, I wonder if you want to tell me a little bit about. Obviously, I know that you started life as a chemist, but now you're actually interested in bacteria. So, tell us, how did you end up here in Oxford?
So I think it's a slightly unconventional route in some ways, in that as a child, I always wanted to be a footballer, but it was clear, I guess, fairly early on that wasn't going to be the case. And then eventually my parents wanted me to study medicine, and I chose the A-levels that were appropriate for that. So chemistry, biology, maths. And as I was doing those, I discovered that it was really chemistry that I liked. And as I went forward, it was the interface between chemistry and biology. And then sort of went through the university system at Warwick, came to Oxford as a postdoc after my PhD, and just discovered bacteria. And I guess for me, it's always been endlessly fascinating that we're these complex beings. We're made up of hundreds and thousands of cells. Bacteria are a single cell, and we still can't find antibiotics to beat these things. How can that happen? And so it's that really, I think, that really excites me.
So it's the chemistry of life and how things interact, and is that
I think so, because when all said and done, at the very, very fundamental level, it's the movement of atoms, when it boils down to. And I think it's that for me that's interesting.
So do you have a lab coat, and do you have dry ice going everywhere and Bunsen burners going? You're a proper scientist.
No, you're setting me up here, folks. You know I'm not, Tim. I am a proper scientist, though.
So what do you do on your day-to-day, your day-to-day research?
So I'm a computational biochemist, which means I use the principles of physics, biology, and chemistry, and if you like, put them all together to make movies. So predict how things will move in the body or inside cells, but I don't actually go into a lab. I don't have a white coat. I don't sort of get my hands dirty with real chemicals or real biological samples. Everything is done inside a computer.
But you can someone then go and test what you predict and what you find? Can they go and, I don't know, use microscopes or X-rays to work out what's going on to see whether your models are any good?
Yeah, absolutely. So both of those things. So for example, just like we can take X-rays of our bones, it turns out we can take X-rays of proteins, tells us a bit about what those proteins look like. I can take that information, make a movie, make it work, and make it do something, which then someone in the laboratory can test. And Oxford's great for that, because in biology, in chemistry, in biochemistry, I have lots of collaborators who actually go into the labs and test those things. And then we go backwards and forwards.
And so you can find out different types of ways that molecules are interacting and behaving that people might not have picked up in the lab, and then they can go and look for that, can they? So can you say, we think that this is going on, and people go,
absolutely. It works both ways. So it can be that the people in the lab say, hey, Syma, we found some strange phenomenon in the data that we're collecting and we don't understand it. We think that maybe this molecule is sticking to this one. We didn't expect that. Is that happening? So it's maybe sometimes with mass spectrometry, for example. And then...
So what's mass spectrometry?
So molecules are ionized, they're charged.
Yeah.
And then the signal that you detect is the mass of that molecule compared to its charge. So you get a ratio.
Okay.
Right? So you know what its mass is. And if two molecules are stuck together, you will know the masses of them, but you might not know exactly where they're interacting with each other. But I would then do a molecular simulation and say, I think this is what's happening. And so we would go backwards and forwards.
Okay, so that's where the mass spectrometry bit comes from.
Yes.
And then, when they stick to one another, is that through the sort of charges, the electrons interacting, or is it kind of, where the electrons are around the atoms? I mean...
Yeah, at the fundamental level, it's all driven by electrons, right?
Yeah,
it will be. So it's either that, you have regions of where electrons move away and the nucleus is exposed. And so that region becomes positive and it attracts to, just like we know with magnets, right? You get positive and negative poles attract.
Yeah.
The same thing happens here with molecules.
I think I remember this from... so polar and non-polar bonds. Does that ring a bell from chemistry?
It does, Tim.
Okay. I've remembered something from a long time ago.
Good.
And then but I thought one of the things about atoms is we don't really know where the electrons are, because they show this quantum behavior where they're a wave around the atom. So does that make it complicated to actually predict how they're going to interact?
It's a really good question. It does, and I cheat. So what I do is I say...
What a surprise.
Harsh. So I say that in my world, an atom or a group of atoms are like squidgy balls.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and there's no explicit electrons. I just stick a charge on. Okay. It's negative or positive with a magnitude. And so I make an approximation, and it turns out it works really well. Yeah, it doesn't work for everything, but for the things that I'm interested in, the bacterial membranes and the bacterial cells, it works really well, and it matches up very well with the experiments. But you're right. If we were to look at every single electron, it's not actually possible.
Yeah, okay. So can you work out then which sort of drugs are going to be able to cross bacterial membranes? I mean, I'll ask it in a rude way. Is there any use to this research?
You're asking in a rude way. What a surprise. I'll get my own back. We can get insights. The problem, of course, is that in real biology, there are things that we may not have taken into account because we don't know it's there. There'll be things that get in the way. There might be a potential difference across the membrane. It might be charged under certain conditions. When the becomes stressed, for example, it might change its composition. There's all sorts of complications in biology that in the computer simulation, it's very difficult to put all of those details in, but we can certainly get insights and we can get rank orders. So we can say this molecule is easier to get across than this one.
Okay. So when we're talking to people on the more kind of chemistry and physics end, you're going to be asking the hard questions, aren't you?
I am. So now let me flip that to you, Tim.
Okay.
What
questions am I going to be asking?
Yeah. So what how I'm going. You know what I'm going to ask you. Can you tell us what sort of scientist you are? I know you're a real scientist. We've established that.
So I don't have a lab coat either, but I'm interested in understanding how the natural world works and how ecosystems work. So I tend to think from, I'm not looking at cells or molecules like you are, not what's going on within organisms, but I'm looking at the whole organism and how they interact with one another. So, for example, I might be interested in why we see changes in the numbers of particular animals. So one of the things we work on is wolves. So why in some years in Yellowstone National Park, which is a place where I work, do we see lots of wolves? Other years there are fewer. What are the causes of that? And what do the wolves, what's their role? How do they impact the whole ecosystem? Because obviously wolves eat elk eat grass. If your wolf numbers go down, elk are a type of deer. If wolf numbers go down, you're going to get fewer elk. You might get more elk. You might get less grass, and all of these things kind of, all these kind of things work their way through the whole ecosystem. So you go and shoot half the wolves, and all sorts of changes, some of which you might never have thought about change. So and I try and build math. So I like going to the fields.
Yep.
Pretty hopeless field worker, to be honest. But I like going and I like thinking about these things. And then a bit like you, what we do is we'll collect data, we'll analyze those data, and then we'll construct models on the computer to make predictions about what might happen in the future.
So when you said that it's how animals interact with each other, but that also includes how they interact with the environment around them.
That's right. So I mean, the environment is kind of a word, it's an all-encompassing word. So a wolf's environment might include the number of animals that it can eat. So elk, mule deer, pronghorn antelope, if they're lucky, they're they're much faster than wolves. So they'd probably only stumble across a sick one. Things like skunks, they'll even hunt, believe it or not. So that's part of the environment. But the other part of the environment is things like the weather. And people, of course, are worried about climate change at the moment. And in Yellowstone, we're starting to see changes in the amount of snow. Wolves like snow. They're good at running through it. Their prey's less good at running through it. And so, yeah, we're interested in how all sorts of aspects in the environment, the other animals, climate, but also things like disease. And so there's a disease called chronic wasting disease, which is coming into the mule deer that live on the edge of the park at the moment. So we're interested in how an emerging disease, and that's a bit like mad cow disease for deer, how that's going to impact the whole system.
So from what you've said, I can see how you can provide explanations from observed phenomena, but is there a predictive element to the work too?
It's a good question, and we try to make predictions, but of course, because we can't predict the weather, we don't know what it's going to be next year. Our predictions, there's a range of things that could happen. and we sort of say we think that these outcomes are going to be more likely than the next outcomes, and then and we don't go and bet on those predictions because they're not. It's almost as it's predicting football scores is hard. It's even harder than that, unless you're a Spurs fan, in which case we predict you're going to lose next game, I suppose.
You might not. It's against us. So I think so in that sense, it's similar to what I just said about the drugs and the membranes. It's that complexity that we're unable to account for fully in both of our works, it seems.
I think that's right. And I think it's the complexity that is really exciting in our field. So, and the way that I think of science is you sort of go from, the physical end, where you're thinking about how atomic nuclei and electrons are interacting, protons and neutrons, where we've got a fairly good idea of how they interact, through to molecules where it becomes a little bit more complicated, through to cells it's even more complicated. And then that complexity takes us right the way through to whole ecosystems. Yes. But despite that, I think it's absolutely remarkable what science has taught us and can tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sometimes seems unbelievable that those discoveries have been made, given, in a way, how little we know.
No, I think that's right. And I mean, I think it kind of comes back to one of the motivations why we both wanted to do this podcast, is I think we're all scientists at heart. We'll often, in our day-to-day lives, we'll see something or we have a problem to solve, and we'll try and solve it through trial and error. Yes. And you work out what works and what doesn't work, and you kind of hone in on the solution. And that's what all scientists doing. It's coming up, but we put words like we're posing a hypothesis. It's like, and some of those hypotheses, in the way that I think you're talking about it, are mathematical hypotheses and things that we then go and test. But that's one of the things I want to get across as we interview and talk to people, that it's about kind of coming up with a question, trying a few things to see what works, and then you find out some facts about it. Eventually, kind of, or you certainly get support for that hypothesis, and you learn a little bit more. And
absolutely, and then when you put it into the context of other people working in the same area in other labs or other parts of the world, and that comes together, so you see slightly different angles. And I think that's something else that we're hoping to bring in onto the podcasts, to have interesting stories, but maybe people coming at slightly different angles to those.
Well, I think also finding out a little bit about the scientists themselves on occasion as well, and asking them, it's kind of interesting. I mean, how did you, obviously everyone loves wolves, it's kind of obvious, but molecules, so give us a little bit more example. Was there a moment when you love chemistry, and from an early age, you said, and is that because it was kind of, it was something that wasn't as messy as a bacteria, or it was things that made good logical sense? Or
I think for me, I was good at chemistry.
Yeah, that always helps.
As a child, it sort of gives you confidence. I mean, when I started school, I actually, I struggled because I couldn't actually speak a word of English.
Oh, really?
And that's right. So it took a good, and sports was an easier thing to do. But it took a while to get in, and chemistry, I guess it had that good balance between being quantitative and qualitative. And so I was good at it, and I started enjoying it. And then it was, I didn't really care about making synthetic molecules or plastics or metals. It was the biology of, the chemistry of biology that excited me. And so I really got into that. And I've always been interested in sort of video gaming and art. And then suddenly, when my undergraduate project supervisor, he arrived from Reading to Warwick, and he offered a project in being able to combine computing, sort of graphics and chemistry. It sort of blew my mind, to be honest. And I would say that I was bitten by the bug at that point as an undergraduate, and it just stayed with me.
We'll have to see some of the videos you produce actually in one of these podcasts. That would be good.
You know me, I'll always happy to show you videos of my work. But I want to go back to the wolves. Yeah. I don't think it's that obvious, Tim, that everyone loves wolves. So how did that start?
So, well, it's interesting. So I was I didn't really know what I wanted to. I was a science junkie from a young age, and I actually had a place to read maths at university. I
Okay.
think at Warwick, if I remember right. It's so long ago now, I can't remember. But I went off to Africa for a year off, and I was teaching in a school in the middle of nowhere. And I went for a walk one day, and I saw a herd of antelope impala, and I thought, I don't want to be a mathematician. I want to be a biologist.
Really?
But this was before the age of email. So I wrote on airmail paper to my parents and said, I don't want to be a mathematician.
Wow.
And I want to be a biologist. And if I'd been them, I think I'd have just pretended the letter never arrived. But I said, can you apply for me to go to university and to do biology rather than maths? So they did. And everyone, they wrote in the letter, actually, it's quite funny. They wrote in the letter, Tim can't come to interview because he's in Africa. And I think, because I'd already got my grades, so I think 4 of the universities wrote back and said, can Tim come for interview on these dates? And they're like, oh. But York actually read it and said, no, we'll offer him a place. So I went to York, where
wonderful.
I studied biology. But I always enjoyed the maths, and I still use the maths a bit. I wouldn't say I'm a very good mathematician, but I
think you are.
I enjoy.
Is that common for biologists to have a strong interest in mathematics?
More so, but I think quite a lot of biologists end up going into biology because they like the complexity of it. And also, I think at A levels, certainly when I went through, biology was the least mathematical of the sciences. Yes. So physics, was quite mathematical. Chemistry was a bit more mathematical. Yes. I shouldn't tell you this, but I hated chemistry at school. I did chemistry A level. I had a chemistry set at home.
Right.
I failed to make anything explode. It was which is my primary aim.
At this point, Tim, I'm actually thinking, why are we friends? So we sport opposite football teams. I love chemistry. You hate chemistry. So maybe it's something we could ponder.
I like it now. I hated it at school. No, I mean, I think it's, I think chemistry is amazing. And I think the fact that you can create so many different molecules from a relatively small number of atoms, and particularly in biology, where you can form these chains of carbons with nitrogen, and I just think that's absolutely astonishing and absolutely remarkable.
And within that, we can encode, all the blueprint for life, which again brings us back to DNA and where we'll, we'll future podcasts.
And so, I mean, one of the other things that obviously you enjoy and I enjoy, which is why we're here, is kind of science communication, whether it's lecturing or talking to the press or what have you. So any kind of favourite lectures that you love to give the undergraduates, or kind of favourite dealings with the press that you've had over the years?
I think in terms of communication, the one thing that really sticks to my mind and sort of I think about actually quite a lot is so before coming to Oxford, as you know, I was at the University of Southampton, and I did a pint of science talk, and so for those who don't know what pint of science is, it's whereby one goes into a pub, and it's been pre-arranged with the pub, of course, and give a short talk about science to the people drinking in the pub, often, and if you can manage it with a pint in your hand. And so I did one of these on the rise of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. And after I gave the talk, an elderly couple came up to me and said that they've always been told that you must finish your course of antibiotics, but that was the first time anyone had ever explained to them why. And they were really grateful. And it's something that's so obvious to me because I'm in that field. And it was shocking in a way that no one has bothered to explain that this is why you must do it. And actually,
so why must you finish?
Well, they were under the misapprehension that they would become resistant.
Ah, of course. Okay.
Right? And so,
not the bacteria,
that's
right.
Not
the microbes.
And so you finish the course of antibiotics because if you don't kill all the bacteria, the ones that survive, then actually not even too slowly, begin to develop resistance. They find ways to combat and overcome the effect of the antibiotic.
What if a few of them are resistant already to that antibiotic? If you keep taking it, aren't you just breeding a population that's kind of more and more resistant?
Yeah, so that is a problem. So we're still trying to understand how these resistant mechanisms develop, but a big problem is abuse of antibiotics or misuse of antibiotics, which does lead to development of or faster development of resistant bacteria. The interesting thing about bacteria is they're incredibly aggressive. They're the most aggressive known organisms, so they have lots of ways to kill each other, actually. And so that's something that people are thinking to use in the future.
So is that why many of them have have abilities to, or chemicals that kill other bacteria? And so what we're looking for some of that. You're sometimes looking for some of those, or people working on drug development often look in bacteria and other animals, and that's what they're looking for, those killer chemicals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay. And oftentimes those chemicals will be harmless to us, but they will kill other bacteria. They won't kill, the bacteria won't kill themselves because they have immunity. They're very clever.
No, that's fascinating, actually. That's really fascinating. So, and I mean, talking about point of science, our wonderful producer Rich, he didn't bring a pint along for us tonight, did he? That was he was a bit remiss over there.
Next time.
So
I'm going to ask you now. So you've done lots and lots of work with the media and communicating science. Is there a favourite story that you have? You must have many, Tim.
Believe it or not, this wasn't set up, but it was something within the university, and it's very, very surreal. For a while, I was head of the biology department, and the University of Oxford, for long and complicated reasons, actually got a lot of Kafka's paper, Franz Kafka, who, where this is.
I remember this, I know where this is going.
And so I was, they were going to celebrate, on the anniversary of his death, they were going to celebrate his life. And they wanted each bit of the university, so the medics, the scientists, the social scientists, and those people working in the humanities, to do something to celebrate it. So I organised a couple of events in the Natural History Museum where we looked at, discussed to insects, because one of Kafka's most remarkable books is called The Metamorphosis, when a guy called Gregor Samsa wakes up as a cockroach or a giant insect, a verminous insect. So often translated in English to cockroach. So those were a great success. The public came along, and after one of these, I was asked whether I would read a little bit of The Metamorphosis in the beautiful Sheldonian Theatre. We should do a live podcast there, get the audience in at some point. In the Sheldonian Theatre. And I said, yeah, that would be great. And someone said, I've got a giant cockroach outfit if you'd like to wear it. And so it seemed like a good idea at the time. But it was a really hot day. And so I hid the cockroach outfit behind a screen. And when it was my turn to read, just before I went behind the screen to put this thing on, it was huge with antennae and legs. And I hadn't realised the screen was backlit. So I went behind it and pulled this cockroach outfit on so the entire Sheldonian could see arms and legs and antenna going everywhere. And I came out and I read it. And then, I don't know what people thought was going on. And then I went back behind the screen and did the strip tease where they could see this. But the real media, so then this kind of went a bit nuts on social media, on X and LinkedIn even, bizarrely. So I get a phone call the next day from the Oxford Mail and said, we saw you dressed as a cockroach. Our lead story today happens to be about a cockroach infestation on the services of the M40, a local motorway. Would I care to comment? So I did. And then the headline in our local rag, the Oxford Mail, said something along the lines of, professor who lectures in cockroach outfit speaks out on the M40 services infestation, with no explanation of why I was wearing a with this photo of me. So that was probably the most ridiculous story, but
that's a good story. It's a very good story,
and I think that shows that. I mean, you can end up. Science can be fun as well, and I think we have to kind of have fun, because I think people often think of science and sometimes scientists as sort of being kind of pretty serious, grey hair. I don't have any hair, and yours is blue.
It's going grey. It is going.
So I think, I think actually and I think this is changing, but I think everyone realizes that anyone can be a scientist now, and we don't have to.
Yeah, neither of us come from a particularly conventional sort of route, I guess, in a way.
And I think, and certainly you go to conferences now, and it's certainly changed over the last kind of three decades that I've going. And so, it's a huge range of people from all sorts of backgrounds.
I think so. And that's as it should be, because it brings in the talent from everywhere.
And even, the undergraduates we teach, they're all brilliant, and they're from all over the place now.
Yep, all around the world in different backgrounds. It's great.
So I think it's probably time to wrap this one up, and we'll be back in a week or so. We're going to try and do these every week or two. We'll see how it goes, and hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, and we'll be on with a guest next time, so you won't be subjected to just me and Tim rambling about football.
Thank you.
Cheers, bye.